Welcome to Chapter 10.3, Muslim Civilizations. Muslim Civilizations' Golden Age. Muslim civilizations enjoyed a golden age under the Abbasids. Their empire stretched into Asia and the Middle East, Africa, and Europe. Merchants crossed the Sahara, traveling along the Silk Road to China, and they sailed to India and Asia. New products and ideas were exchanged, and the religion of Islam was introduced to many regions. All this fueled the Muslim economy, leading to the development of partnerships and the use of credit and banking systems. Artisans created manufactured goods for trade, and the government helped to improve farming through large irrigation systems. Muslim society allowed some social mobility, the ability to move up in the social class through religious, scholarly, or military achievements. Most slaves were household servants, and some were able to purchase their freedom. The children of some slaves could become free with the Muslim system. The diverse cultures in the empire, as well as Islam, influenced art and literature. Early oral poetry told tales of nomadic life, while later poets developed elaborate rules for poems. Great Muslim poets include Firdawsi, who told the story of Persia, and Omar Khayyam, who wrote about the fate and the life of Rubaiyat. The storytellers often used short anecdotes to entertain people. In architecture, buildings reflect the Byzantine influence, and mosques included domes and minarets like the Byzantine Empire. Muslim artists also used calligraphy, which is the art of beautiful handwriting, or for decoration on buildings and in books. Muslims made great strides in education, and both boys and girls were educated so that they could study the Quran. Several cities supported learning centers with vast libraries. Their scholars translated Greek, Hindu, and Buddhist texts known in Europe as Averroes. The philosopher Ibn Rushd believed that the knowledge should meet the standard of reason. Another Muslim thinker, Ibn Khaldun, studied history scientifically and advised others to avoid errors such as bias. In mathematics, Al-Khwarizmi pioneered in the study of algebra, and Muhammad al-Raiz, chief physician in the hospital in Baghdad, wrote books on disease and medical practices. Ibn Sina, a famous Persian physician, compiled an encyclopedia of medical knowledge. Both doctors' works guided medical studies in Europe for almost 500 years. Other physicians improved ways to save eyesight and to mix medicines. As the Muslim empire expanded, it absorbed the traditions and the cultures of the people that they conquered. This created a new and vibrant and flourishing civilization that mixed the best of all worlds. Some of the places that they conquered and included were Arabia, Persia, Egypt, Africa, Europe. This led to a very multicultural environment. Later, the Mongols, the Turks, and the Indians, and even Southeast Asians were included in the culture. This, combined with their preservation of the earlier Greek and Roman civilization pieces, helped to create a very knowledgeable culture. This huge empire was laced with trade routes, and merchants were more honored in Muslim culture than they were farther east. Merchant caravans would cross the Sahara and go along the Silk Road to China, taking with them all kinds of beautiful and exotic treasures. Arab shipping also functioned during this time, and the Arab ship or boat was called a dhow. This was especially used in East Africa along the coast, and these dhows would travel even as far as India and Indonesia. Arabic became the lingua franca, or the common language of the traders. And Arabic numerals helped these traders to keep records and to keep track of all the information that they needed to know. Sugar was produced in India and was traded along the trade routes. And paper, the idea of paper and the technology to make it, was adopted by many Muslim scholars and paper makers. Money also was used widely in the Muslim empire, and this opened up huge possibilities for trade. It made new business practices, including partnerships, which had not really been used before, credit, banks, where they would exchange currency, and checks, which is in Arabic world, the word sak. Banks opened branches all over in the various big cities in the Muslim empire. In the Muslim empire, goods were produced by guilds, and these guilds regulated how the goods would be produced and distributed. The different guilds included sword making in Damascus, leather in Cordoba, textiles in Egypt, carpets in Persia, glassware, furniture, tapestries. All these things helped to produce a very intricate trade network in the Muslim empire. Agriculture was vitally important in the Muslim empire. It was a drier climate, and the government decided to support irrigation projects in the desert regions, and they helped to fund the draining of swamps in areas like the Tigris, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, which helped to make it more produce more grain for their population. And they also were involved, the farmers grew sugarcane, cotton, medicinal herbs, dates, and grain. They were also producing meat and wool and leather from the nomadic tribal peoples. One of the major positive things about the Muslim empire was the social mobility that was practiced. People who were born a slave could end as a ruler. So it wasn't unusual to be able to move up in the ladder, or to hear stories of people who had earned their way out of slavery and gained a position in society. So social mobility was important, and the main avenues for moving upward would be through military, if they earned scholarly recognition, or if they were well known for religious achievements. Slavery also was not uncommon in the in Muslim empire. It was they were not supposed to enslave Muslims, but if the people usually taken in battle converted to Islam, they were sometimes set free after a period of time. And this enslaving of conquered peoples was one way that they gained slaves. Slaves were given their freedom, especially as a result of their master's death, on the event of their master's death, if it was death by natural causes. Children born to slaves, if there was a slave mother and a free father, the children were considered free. Turkish slave soldiers, known as janissaries, were one type of unique slave that was found in the Muslim empire. And these were generally children that had been taken in the Balkans, which they had been born into Catholic or Christian families, but they had been taken as slaves and educated in Islam and had grown up and converted to Islam, and then they're put into an elite fighting force. And often it was through that experience and that training that they were handpicked to become the leaders of the empire. So these men were well known for their fighting ability and their loyalty to the Caliph. Muslim art and architecture are well known for their beautiful geometric figures and the use of calligraphy. But so one of the greatest works, pieces of literature in the Muslim tradition is the Quran. The Quran states that there should be no figures of God or of humans in religious artwork. And so this is one of the reasons why there is so much calligraphy or geometric design. Pre-Islamic artwork and oral poetry had themes of chivalry and romance and the nomadic life and the dangers of the desert and the joys of battle and the glory of their clans. And these ripple down into some of the stories that we still have today. 1,000 Nights, Arabian Nights is one example, or the story of Aladdin and the lamp. Those are stories that were told as in oral tradition and later passed down in writing. There was a famous woman who was a poet, Rabiha al-Adawiyya, who is a Sufi mystic. And she wrote poetry that encouraged faithfulness in worship of God. And this is one of the things she wrote. If I worship thee in hope of paradise, exclude me from paradise. So she's encouraging her listener to love God for his own sake, not for what she can get out of him. Firdausi, another poet from Persia, wrote in Persian but with an Arabic script. He wrote a book named Shah Nama, which means Book of Kings. And this book tells the story of the history of Persia. He wrote, the tale is told that Rustam had at first such strength bestowed by him, who gives all that if he walked upon a rock, his feet would sink therein. Such power as that proved an abiding trouble, and he prayed to God in bitterness of soul to diminish his strength, that he might walk like other men. This is an example of his poetic style, but he's actually speaking, it's kind of half myth, half history, trying to give a brief history of Persia. Another author was Omar Khayyam, who is a scholar and an astrologer. He's best known for the Rabayat, which is a collection of 4-line stanzas meditating on the fate of the shortness of life. This is a stanza. This is one of his stanzas. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on, nor all your piety, nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all your tears wash out the word of it. So these beautiful poems, which are translated into English and so may not have the same ring that they would in Arabic, are topped by the collection of stories in the 1001 Nights. The collection of stories in the 1001 Nights is just exactly that. It's a collection of stories that were supposedly told by a woman who was married to the king, but the king was not happy with her until she says that she can tell stories, and so that was her claim to fame. And so she would start a story but not finish it until the next night, and then start a new story and not finish it until the next night. So she ended up prolonging her life for 1001 nights, and in that process she wins the heart of the king. But she does that through telling of interesting stories. And this is where we get the story of Aladdin and the lamp and Ali Baba and the 40 thieves. So these are stories that we find entertaining today. The Muslim Empire adopted their architectural style from the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines were the first to really experiment with the dome, and the Muslim empires take that on and put domes on pretty much all of their buildings. One example of this is the big building called the Dome of the Rock, which was built in Jerusalem. It's like one of the earliest examples of Islamic experimentation with domes. And this building was built in 688, right on the space that it was the Temple Mount. And the Muslims believe that this spot was where Abraham sacrificed his son, wait for it, not Isaac, but Ishmael. So they believe that Ishmael was the sacrificial son, not Isaac. And they also believe that this was the spot from which Muhammad took a journey up to heaven to get more revelation from God, and then came back down again during Eid al-Adha. Non-religious artwork was mainly reserved for scientific diagrams of the human body, and this was used for doctors who were trying to learn the different parts of the body and the internal systems. There were also some literary works that had illustrations inside them. The Muslim Empire sought to advance knowledge, especially in philosophy, history, mathematics, and science. Also, both boys and girls were given an elementary education in reading and writing in Arabic. And if you go to Muslim countries even today, both children usually have special school time where they learn to at least read in Arabic. Whether they understand that Arabic is another question, though. Institutes of higher learning developed, and these would be similar to universities today. And they developed in great trade centers like Cordoba and Timbuktu and Damascus and Cairo and Baghdad. And these places drew scholars and students to the pursuit of learning. In Baghdad, the caliph who is credited with encouraging Muslim scholarship was a man named Al-Mamun, and he tried to create Baghdad as a center of learning by developing huge libraries and paying scholars quite high salaries in order to draw the best scholars. So he did a lot to help preserve some of the ancient civilizations that the Muslim Empire was conquering. Some of these empires would be the Persian Empire or the Indian civilizations, which used Sanskrit, and ancient Greece as well. Cairo was another center of learning in Egypt, and it became well known for its purity of religious and linguistic Arabic and Islam. Cordoba was another center of learning, and it became well known for its scientific and philosophical, mathematic, and medicinal fields. Timbuktu, another place in Africa, also became known as a center of learning. The famous Muslim philosopher Ibn Rushd lived in Cordoba in the later half of the crusading period, and he became interested in absolutely everything. He was one of those Polycarp peoples. That means he had he was at genius level in many different fields. So he became a physician, and he was the chief physician for the Muslim ruler of Spain. And then he took up astronomy and law and became a famous judge. And unfortunately, he made some enemies in the mosque or in the Muslim religious community because he was a lot more open-minded than some of his peers, and so he was banished for several years. Another famous scholar was a man named Ibn Khaldun, who set the standards for scientific study of history. by insisting that a historian should look at the economics and the social structure as causes for historical events. He warned about the dangers of bias and exaggeration and trusting your sources too much without questioning them. Mathematics was also greatly developed under the Muslim Empire. A man named Al-Khawarizm pioneered the study of algebra. And algebra is actually an Arabic word. And his studies and his textbook that he wrote in 800 became the textbook for Europeans during the entire Middle Ages. It was translated into Latin for students from the original Arabic. The Muslim Empire was one of the first to institute a test for doctors and pharmacists so that they had to pass the test before they could legally practice their profession. The Muslim Caliph also instituted a government hospital for the needy and the poor who needed medical treatment. Physicians would even travel to rural areas and visit jails to give health care. Muhammad al-Razi was a head physician at Baghdad's chief hospital, and he was a pioneer in the study of measles and smallpox, which incidentally have been one of the greatest killers in the history, even probably more than the plague. He understood the connection between the emotions and the health. He felt that hopeful thinking of a patient could result in better healing. And his works were translated into Latin, and they also became textbooks for physicians in Europe for the next 500 years. Another physician was the Persian named Ibn Sina, and he was so intelligent that even at the age of 16, he became a physician for nobility. He wrote a medical encyclopedia called the Canon of Medicine, which basically compiled the Greek and Arabic learning of that time period. And it was also used as a textbook for European doctors. Eye surgery was experimented with during this time, and the treatment of cataracts was attempted by using a hollow needle that you would take the fluid out of the eye to help correct the focus of the lens. And it was usually successful, which is really surprising. European physicians began to attend Muslim universities in Spain for their training.